Chapter 4 of A Sharper's Downfall, or Into the Net. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A Sharper's Downfall, or Into the Net, by Nicholas Carter. Chapter 4 Overreaching, a Sharper. An hour passed, during which Spike Thomas waited as patiently as Patsy, on the opposite corner, patiently watched him. At the end of that time, Spike showed by his action and his vigilance that the person or persons for whom he had watched had come into view. Presently, two men crossed from the lower side of 34th Street to the corner where Spike was standing, and as they passed him, carelessly nodded to him. Spike spoke to them, and they halted. What passed between them, of course, Patsy could not tell, but it evidently ended in an invitation to drink on the part of one of the two strangers, a man who in his outward appearance looked like everything else but a thief and burglar. As Patsy was preparing to follow, he suddenly became aware that a man had stopped on the pavement immediately in front of him and was regarding the group across the street most intently. Looking at this man closely, Patsy quickly recognized a celebrated detective from Chicago. Stepping up to him, Patsy called him by name, revealing himself to the Chicago sleuth. "What do you know of those men over there?" he asked. "Are you after them?" asked the Chicago man in return. "I am after the one who's on the corner that they spoke to. He is Spike Thomas, a New York crook, second-story man." "That dressy man that's talking to him," said the Chicago man, "is Jimmy Lanigan, the swell crackman of Philadelphia. He's the best lockman in the world. I was surprised to see him here, for I supposed he was in St. Louis. He was in Chicago all last winter, and while we suspected him of several jobs, we couldn't fix it on him." By this time, the three men had entered the liquor saloon on the corner, and Patsy said, "I'd like to talk to you a little longer, but I must get closer to those people." He slipped across the avenue, and the Chicago sleuth went his way. Peering into the saloon, Patsy saw the three men standing in a little group at the bar. There was no one else in the saloon, and Patsy did not dare to enter lest his appearance should be noted, but he did see that Spike Thomas was urging something strongly on the one the Chicago sleuth had called Lanigan, and he heard the latter say in a rather loud voice, "We can't talk about it here. Let's go to another place." Patsy retired from the door and took such a position on the corner that he could observe both the front and the rear doors. In a few minutes, the three men appeared at the front door and, turning the corner, walked down 34th Street in the direction of the East River. Patsy sauntered after them. It was not a difficult matter to keep them in sight, although from time to time both Thomas and Lanigan looked behind them. Patsy thought it was more because of habit than in a belief they were being followed. Their way took them to the last block of the street, and here they turned into a saloon which was well filled with customers, and where they could easily talk without attracting attention. At the rear of the saloon in the corner was a table and some chairs. At it, Spike Thomas, Lanigan, and his companion sat down and immediately entered into a close conversation. In the beginning, the talk was almost entirely conducted by Spike Thomas, Lanigan's replies seemingly being a series of denials. By and by, Patsy drifted to the table next to the party, but which was still some little distance from it, too far away indeed to hear what was being said by the three, as they talked in a low tone. Finally, however, Spike Thomas raised his voice a bit, apparently a little angry, and said, "What are you giving me? I know you was into it, and you had a right to take me in. It's no way to treat a pal. I got something up me sleeve, and if you don't take me in on the level, I'll make trouble for you." Lanigan merely laughed and called for some more drinks, but the third man was evidently inclined to regard seriously the threat conveyed in Spike's words. Speaking to Lanigan in a low tone, he rose from his seat and took Lanigan apart and talked earnestly and vigorously. Whatever it was that was said made an impression upon Lanigan, and he turned abruptly and went back to the table. "See here, Spike," said Lanigan, "you don't want to do anything ugly until you know what you're doing. Billy and I can't talk with you until we've been across the river. We'll be back inside of an hour, and see you right here. If there's a whack into anything, You'll get your share." The two tossed off their drinks and, rising, immediately left the saloon. Spike Thomas remained at the table, looking, as Patsy thought, much dissatisfied with the outcome. "Anyhow," said Patsy, "Spike'll remain here for an hour or two." Suddenly, Patsy rose to his feet and sauntered from the saloon. He ran up the street hastily and turned the corner. Half an hour later, a young fellow, rather jauntily dressed but, nevertheless, one in whom the East Side tough showed, came down the street and turned into the saloon where Spike was awaiting the return of Lanigan and his companion. Arriving in the center of the ballroom, he gave a flip to the brim of his hat with a snap of his finger, sending it back on his head, gave a characteristic hitch to one shoulder, and, with a protruding chin, walked over to the table where Spike Thomas sat. "Say, Spike, I've been looking for yous," said the newcomer. Spike looked up with a frown on his face and curiously regarded the other fellow. "Well," he said, "yous has found me. What's the trouble?" "Say, Spike," said the new man, "does yous know anything about that job of crib cracking up in 35th Street? Spike partly closed his eyes and regarded the other keenly and suspiciously. At length he replied, "Nah, nor yous either, Bully Morris." "That's right," replied the other. "I don't know much for a fact, but I got a couple of lines onto it that you can work if you knows who did the job." Again, Spike looked at the young fellow, but this time it was not alone suspiciously, but with an evident desire to have him show his hand. He altered his tone and manner toward the newcomer. "Have some booze?" he asked. As the lad he called Morris sat down at the table, he said a little more genially, "What about them lines yous has got?" "Dey's all right, if yer know who did the job," replied Morris. "Suppose I did it myself," said Spike with a wink. "Well, I knows yous didn't do it." "Why not?" "'Cause the job was done before 1 o'clock this morning, and yous was with your rag down to Rivington Street along about that time." "That's right," exclaimed Spike with an oath. "And if it hadn't been for the rag, I'm thinking I'd been on to the job. She got me out of the way of it." "Then," said Morris eagerly, "yous does know who did it." Spike gave a huge wink and smiled a knowing smile. "I'm kinder onto it myself," said Morris. "I'm thinking I ain't guessing far wrong when I'm saying it was the swell-lagged Lanigan." Spike gave such a start as made Morris say, "That's the way you think, too." "Well, I got a squint that way," reluctantly admitted Spike. "But what's them lines you's got?" "Well, the first one is that Nick Carter's in the case, and Patsy Murphy with him." "I got that line myself," said Spike. "I knows Patsy this long time. I seed him this morning, and I tumbled to the job." "Well, here's a line you ain't got. The lags took out of the house a case with some papers in it what's worth more than 50 times what all the other things is." "What's that you're giving me?" asked Spike roughly. "What are you getting to?" "It's this. Some big feller in the dark put up the job of getting the lags to get hold of that case. They put up for it, but nothing like what it's worth. Why, man, there's thousands and thousands in that case, and there's more than one dad that would put up big for it." Spike pricked up his ears, for he began to see what was meant and of what use the knowledge of it would be to him in his contest with Lanigan. "Oh, go on," he cried. "You're dopey. You's dreamin'." "Nah, I ain't dreamin'," exclaimed the other. "His nibs that lives in the crib that was cracked would give enough to make us all rich, to get that case back with what's in it." "Say," asked Spike, "where'd you get that line?" "The same place where you got your line," said Morris. "Patsy Murphy?" "The same." "How did he come to do that?" "That's what he's looking for," said Morris. "You see, he's looking for that and nothing else. You know Patsy is an East Sider, and he tackled me to know if I knew who did the job. Then he'd give all his insides to me about it." "Yes, he did," said Spike incredulously. "That's right, he did. And he said that he was talking with you afore he seen me, and if he hadn't been a chump, he'd split to you to see if you wouldn't give him a pointer on the fellers into the job." "That's right," said Spike thoughtfully. "And I gave him the chance when I was pumping him as to whether he knew who did the job." "Well, what of it?" "Well," said Morris, "I was thinking there was some in it for you and me if you handled it right. I was thinking, if you were dead on to the right lags, that yous could go to him and give him a tip about the wuth that was there in that case and get him to hold it up. Then yous who wasn't into the job could dicker between them as wants it bad, and Patsy'd be one to dicker wid." Spike slapped the table with his hands so hard that everyone in the room turned to look, but Spike was too earnest to notice this. To Morris, he said, "You're right, kid. You're dead right. You've got a big line. Now, see here, I know who did the job. I'm dead certain of that, though they won't say they did. But with what you give me, I'll make 'em talk on the level. Now, kid, yous must get out of here. For them as I thinks did it will be here soon. I'm on the dead level with yous, and you got your rake in whatever I pulls off." "All right," said Morris. He got up from the table, pulled his hat over his brows, and then swaggered out of the barroom. Reaching 34th Street, he walked to the west quite rapidly, and on the second corner above, as he turned to the left, he came into close contact with another, an encounter which caused him to step back with a decided start. Then he laughed aloud, most heartily, and if at nothing else, at the look of vast astonishment which spread across the face of the other person. Both the laugh and the look of astonishment were justified. The man he had encountered was an exact duplicate of himself. They needed but a band between them to become Siamese twins. Finally, recovering from his astonishment a bit, the other reached out as if he would take Morris by the shoulder, saying, "Here, cull, what's all this?" "It's all right, Baldy Morris," replied the other, who himself had been called that name by Spike Thomas. Suddenly, the other bent forward, peering keenly into the face of his counterpart, and almost shouted, "Holy gee, it's a plant! The cull is painted for me! That's right!" Again the other laughed so heartily that he could not reply, and while he was holding his sides, his counterpart cried out, "What's the game? Give up now. Who's use?" "Patsy Murphy, Molly Morris," replied Patsy, for it was Patsy. "I didn't think I'd run up agin you so far away from the Bowery. But come along till I get this makeup off me." Somewhat dazed and wholly bewildered, the East Side tough followed obediently the one who had made himself into such a skillful resemblance. "But I say, Patsy," he asked, "what was you up to?" "Nothing that'll hurt you," replied Patsy. "But if you'll play up to the line, it may put some dollars in your pocket." Patsy found on the corner below a drinking place and, going into the washroom, quickly removed the makeup that had made him look like Baldy Morris. Then he took Billy into the barroom and told him just what he had done in his disguise. "Now, Billy," he said in conclusion, "I haven't made you do anything that'll hurt you or anyone else. If you'll take up my lead now and not let Spike know that I faked him so, there'll be some boodle for you from somewhere. Do you see?" he continued. "I'm trying to stop that case from going into the hands of people that, if it ever reaches them, can't be got out of by the right owners." When the real Baldy Morris comprehended the whole scheme, he was quite willing to fall into it and do as Patsy wanted him to do, since there was no danger for him but a chance of profit. "Are you going to be on the level with me?" asked Patsy. "Why shouldn't I be?" replied Morris. "There ain't anything in it for me any other way." "Then," said Patsy, "get down to that place and watch Spike, and meet me on the other corner an hour from now. Wait for me until I come." Patsy hastened to report, for he believed that he had made most important discoveries. End of Chapter 4. Read by Paul Hampton.